November 2014. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves through the narrow streets of Boston's North End as Detective Maria Santos pulled her unmarked sedan into the cracked asphalt parking lot of St. Catherine's Convent at 6:47 a.m. 3 police cruisers had already arrived, their red and blue lights casting eerie shadows against the weathered brick facade of the 19th century building. Santos had been enjoying her morning coffee when the call came through at 6:23 a.m., dispatcher's voice crackling with an urgency that made her stomach drop. What began as a routine welfare check on an elderly nun who had missed morning prayers transformed into something that would unearth a secret buried for nearly 50 years within these sacred walls. Sister Margaret O'Brien, 79 years old, had been found in her small cell at 5:45 a.m. by Sister Catherine Walsh, clutching a yellowed envelope containing photographs and handwritten notes that detailed a murder she claimed to have witnessed in 1965. The discovery sent shockwaves through the tight-knit religious community, but what made seasoned investigators pause was the meticulous detail in Sister Margaret's account. She hadn't just witnessed a killing, she had documented it, photographed evidence, and kept silent for 49 years out of fear for her own life. The morning sun struggled to penetrate the thick clouds hanging over Boston as Santos climbed the 17 stone steps leading to the convent's main entrance. Each step echoed hollowly against the surrounding buildings, creating an almost funeral-like atmosphere that seemed fitting for what awaited inside. The heavy wooden door, carved with religious symbols and worn smooth by decades of hands, opened before she could knock. Mother Superior Agnes Fitzgerald, her face pale and drawn with exhaustion, greeted Santos with trembling hands. At 72, Mother Agnes had overseen St. Catherine's for 23 years, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. Her usually pristine habit appeared rumpled, suggesting she had spent the night pacing the corridors and praying for guidance on how to handle this unprecedented crisis. The envelope Sister Margaret had left behind contained 17 black and white photographs, 4 pages of handwritten notes in her distinctive script, and a detailed floor plan of the convent, marking specific locations with red ink. Most disturbing was a letter addressed to the Boston Police Department, dated October 15, 1965, that she had apparently written but never sent. The letter began with words that would haunt everyone who read them. "I have witnessed the brutal murder of Sister Teresa Martinez in the chapel basement, and I fear I am next. If you're fascinated by cold cases that reveal shocking secrets hidden in plain sight, please hit that like button and subscribe for more details that mainstream coverage always seems to leave out." Sister Teresa Martinez had been only 26 years old when her life was brutally cut short on that fateful October evening in 1965. Born Teresa Elena Martinez on March 12, 1939, in the bustling neighborhood of East Boston, she was the youngest daughter of Miguel Martinez, a longshoreman who worked the busy Boston harbor, and Rosa Martinez, who took in laundry to supplement the family's modest income during the challenging economic climate of the post-war era. Teresa stood 5 feet 8 inches tall with striking black hair that fell in gentle waves to her shoulders before she took her vows and began covering it with the traditional habit. Her warm brown eyes held an intensity that friends described as almost hypnotic, capable of conveying both deep compassion and fierce determination. She possessed an athletic build from years of helping her father with physical labor around their tenement building, and those who knew her remembered distinctive dimples that appeared whenever she smiled, which, according to her older brother Carlos, happened frequently despite their family's struggles. Her childhood was marked by both hardship and hope in equal measure. Miguel Martinez worked long, grueling hours at the docks, often returning home with hands bloodied from handling rough cargo and ropes. Rosa Martinez operated their small apartment like a boarding house, taking in laundry from wealthier families in Beacon Hill and Cambridge. The family's 2-bedroom apartment at 47 Maverick Street housed not only Teresa and her 3 siblings, but also Miguel's elderly father, who had immigrated from Spain in 1923. Teresa's brother Carlos, 3 years her senior, remembered her as the brightest light in our dark little world. He recalled how she would sit by the single window in their kitchen each evening, reading whatever books she could borrow from the local library while helping Rosa fold laundry. She dreamed of becoming a teacher, Carlos told investigators decades later, his voice still breaking with emotion. She wanted to help children like us, kids who didn't have much but had big dreams anyway. Her sister Maria, 2 years older than Teresa, described her as possessing an almost supernatural ability to sense when others were troubled. Teresa could walk into a room and immediately know who was hurting, Maria explained in a 1998 interview. She would spend hours talking to neighbors, offering comfort, sharing what little food we had. Mama used to joke that Teresa was born to be a saint. The decision to enter religious life came to Teresa during her senior year at East Boston High School, where she had maintained excellent grades despite working 20 hours per week at a local bakery to help support her family. Her parish priest, Father Michael Sullivan, had noticed her devotion during daily mass and her natural ability to connect with younger children during Sunday school sessions she volunteered to help with. Teresa's daily routine in the months before her death had become as predictable as the sunrise. She would wake at 4:30 a.m. for personal prayer and meditation in the small chapel, followed by communal prayers with the other sisters at 5:15 a.m. Breakfast was served at 6:00 a.m. in the austere dining hall, where conversations were kept to whispers, out of respect for the contemplative atmosphere the Mother Superior worked to maintain. Her primary responsibility within the convent was managing the small library and teaching basic literacy skills to local children whose families couldn't afford proper schooling. 3 afternoons each week, Teresa would transform the convent's front parlor into a makeshift classroom, welcoming 8 to 12 children ranging in age from 6 to 14. Former student Anthony Ricci, now 72, still remembers how Sister Teresa made reading feel like the most important thing in the world. The North End of Boston in 1965 was a community in transition, caught between its rich Italian immigrant heritage and the changing demographics of post-war America. The neighborhood's population of approximately 15,000 residents lived in tightly packed tenement buildings and row houses that had been home to waves of immigrants since the late 1800s. Most families had lived in the same area for generations, creating an intricate web of relationships where everyone knew everyone else's business. The streets were narrow and winding, following patterns established centuries earlier, long before anyone imagined the automobile traffic that would eventually clog them. Hanover Street served as the neighborhood's main artery, lined with small family-owned businesses, Santarpio's Bakery, where the scent of fresh bread filled the morning air, DeMarco's Market, where housewives gathered to exchange gossip along with their grocery lists, and Café Napoli, where men would spend hours playing cards and debating politics in rapid Italian. St. Catherine's Convent occupied a unique position within this tight-knit community. Built in 1847 with funds donated by wealthy Irish Catholic families, the 3-story brick building housed between 12 and 16 nuns at any given time. The sisters operated a small school, provided basic medical care to those who couldn't afford doctors, and offered meals to families facing particularly difficult times. Their presence was woven into the daily fabric of neighborhood life in ways that made them nearly invisible, which may have been exactly what Teresa's killer was counting on. The political climate of 1965 was marked by significant social upheaval, with the Vietnam War escalating and civil rights movements challenging traditional authority structures throughout American society. Even religious communities were not immune to these pressures, as the Second Vatican Council had introduced reforms that many traditionalists within the Catholic Church viewed with suspicion and resistance. This tension between old and new ways of thinking would prove relevant to understanding the motive behind Teresa's murder. October 15, 1965, began like any other autumn day for Sister Teresa Martinez, but the detailed timeline preserved in Sister Margaret's hidden documentation reveals how quickly an ordinary evening transformed into horror. At 3:15 p.m., Teresa finished her afternoon tutoring session with 7 local children, helping young Patricia Genovese master basic arithmetic, while encouraging Roberto Santos to continue practicing his reading despite his family's pressure for him to quit school and find work. Sister Margaret's notes, written in her precise handwriting and corroborated by other sisters' statements, show that Teresa spent the period between 3:45 p.m. and 4:30 p.m. in the convent's small garden, tending to the herbs they grew for both cooking and basic medical remedies. Sister Catherine Walsh remembered seeing Teresa kneeling beside the rosemary plants, carefully harvesting sprigs while humming what sounded like a Spanish lullaby her mother had taught her years earlier. At 4:45 p.m., Teresa joined the other sisters for evening prayers in the main chapel, where Mother Superior Agnes led them through traditional vespers. Multiple witnesses confirmed her presence during this service, which concluded at 5:20 p.m. Sister Joan Murphy, who knelt directly behind Teresa during prayers, later told investigators that Teresa seemed unusually contemplative that evening, spending several extra minutes in silent prayer after the formal service ended. Dinner was served at 6:00 p.m. sharp in the convent's dining hall, a sparse room furnished with a single long wooden table and simple chairs that had been donated by a local furniture maker decades earlier. Teresa sat in her usual spot, third seat from the left end between Sister Margaret and Sister Ruth Coleman. The meal consisted of vegetable soup, brown bread, and apples from trees on the convent grounds. Sister Margaret's notes specifically mentioned that Teresa ate very little, claiming she felt unsettled about something she couldn't quite name. The last confirmed sighting of Teresa alive occurred at 7:25 p.m., when Sister Catherine Walsh saw her walking toward the basement stairs, carrying a small oil lamp and what appeared to be a manila envelope. When Sister Catherine asked where she was going, Teresa responded, "I need to check something in the storage room, but I'll be back before evening prayers." Those would be the last words anyone would admit to hearing Teresa speak. At 8:00 p.m., the convent bell rang, calling the sisters to their final communal prayers of the day. When Teresa failed to appear, Sister Margaret was sent to look for her. This search led her down the narrow stone steps to the basement, where she discovered a scene that would haunt her for the rest of her life. According to her written account, she arrived at the basement level at 8:07 p.m. and immediately noticed Teresa's oil lamp lying shattered on the stone floor, its flame extinguished and oil spreading in a dark puddle. Sister Margaret's photographs, taken with a small camera she had borrowed months earlier to document the convent's historical artifacts, show Teresa's body positioned near the far wall of the storage room, surrounded by scattered papers and overturned boxes. The manila envelope Teresa had been carrying was torn open, its contents apparently removed by her killer. Most chilling was Sister Margaret's observation that Teresa's rosary beads had been deliberately arranged around her neck in a pattern that seemed deliberately blasphemous. The basement storage room where Teresa died had been carved from the original foundation stones when the convent was constructed in 1847. The walls were thick granite blocks, which explained why no one upstairs heard any sounds of struggle. The room measured approximately 12 feet by 16 feet and housed religious artifacts, seasonal decorations, and boxes of correspondence dating back decades. A single small window, positioned near the ceiling and covered with iron bars, provided the only natural light during daylight hours. Sister Margaret's crime scene photographs reveal several crucial details that would become important evidence decades later. Scratches on the stone wall suggested Teresa had fought desperately against her attacker. A wooden crucifix that normally hung near the storage room entrance had been thrown to the floor and broken into 3 pieces. Most significantly, Teresa's killer had apparently spent time after the murder searching through boxes of stored documents, leaving papers scattered throughout the room in what appeared to be a frantic search for something specific. The physical evidence Sister Margaret documented included a torn piece of dark fabric caught on a rough stone edge, bloodstains on the floor arranged in a pattern suggesting Teresa had been moved after the initial attack, and muddy footprints that indicated the killer had entered through the basement's exterior door, which opened onto a narrow alley behind the convent. This detail was particularly important because it meant the murderer had intimate knowledge of the building's layout and access points. What makes Sister Margaret's documentation so remarkable is her presence of mind to preserve evidence before reporting the discovery. Her photographs captured the scene exactly as she found it, and her detailed notes recorded precise measurements, lighting conditions, and even the temperature in the basement, which she estimated at approximately 55 degrees Fahrenheit. This level of detail suggests she immediately understood the significance of what she had witnessed and made a conscious decision to document everything before alerting other authorities. Have you ever wondered what you would do if you discovered evidence of a crime in your own community? The isolation these sisters faced makes their situation uniquely terrifying, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. The initial police investigation into Sister Teresa Martinez's murder was hampered by both the technological limitations of 1965 and the complex dynamics between secular law enforcement and religious institutions. The Boston Police Department's North End precinct was staffed by only 12 officers, most of whom had grown up in the neighborhood and maintained close personal relationships with many residents, including several families who had daughters serving as nuns at St. Catherine's Convent. Detective Frank Morrison, a 28-year veteran of the Boston Police Department, was assigned as lead investigator on the case. Morrison had built his reputation solving domestic disputes and minor theft cases, but a murder within a convent represented entirely new territory for both him and his small team of investigators. The department's forensic capabilities in 1965 consisted primarily of basic fingerprint analysis and photography, with more sophisticated techniques like blood type analysis requiring samples to be sent to the state laboratory in Springfield, a process that often took weeks to complete. The investigation immediately focused on 5 primary suspects, each with varying degrees of connection to both Sister Teresa and the convent community. The first suspect was James McCormick, a 43-year-old maintenance worker who had been performing electrical repairs throughout the convent during the weeks preceding the murder. McCormick, a divorced father of 2 who lived in a boarding house on Salem Street, had previous arrests for public intoxication and had been fired from his previous job at St. Mary's Church in Cambridge following complaints from parishioners about his behavior around young women. Detective Morrison's initial interview with McCormick revealed several concerning details. The maintenance worker had been working in the convent's basement just 2 days before Teresa's murder, installing new electrical outlets in the storage room where her body was discovered. McCormick claimed he had finished the work by 4:00 p.m. on October 13th and had not returned to the convent since, but Sister Catherine Walsh told investigators she was certain she had seen him near the building's rear entrance on the evening of October 14th, approximately 24 hours before the murder occurred. McCormick's alibi for the evening of October 15th was that he had been drinking at Murphy's Tavern on Hanover Street from approximately 6:30 p.m. until closing time at 11:00 p.m. However, bartender Thomas Sullivan could only confirm McCormick's presence until around 8:30 p.m., leaving a crucial gap during the estimated time of Teresa's death. When investigators searched McCormick's room at the boarding house, they discovered several religious items that he claimed were gifts from various churches where he had worked, but the items' origins could not be verified. The investigation into McCormick stalled when his fingerprints were found not to match partial prints recovered from the broken oil lamp at the crime scene. Additionally, the torn fabric found caught on the basement wall was determined to be wool from a dark-colored coat, while McCormick consistently wore a canvas work jacket that showed no signs of recent tears or damage. After 3 weeks of intensive investigation, Morrison reluctantly eliminated McCormick as a suspect, though he noted in his report that the maintenance worker's evasive answers and inconsistent timeline continued to trouble him. The second suspect was Father Vincent Torino, a 36-year-old associate pastor at nearby St. Leonard's Church, who had been providing weekly confessions for the sisters at St. Catherine's Convent. Father Torino, ordained in 1954, had developed what several nuns described as an unusually close relationship with Sister Teresa, often engaging her in lengthy conversations about religious philosophy and her work with local children. Mother Superior Agnes had mentioned to Detective Morrison that she had been considering asking Father Torino to reduce his visits because his interactions with Sister Teresa were becoming inappropriate in their frequency and intensity. Father Torino's background investigation revealed a complex and troubling history, Born Vincent Anthony Torino in Boston's West End, he had attended Boston College Seminary after serving briefly in the Korean War. His military service had ended early due to what his discharge papers described as nervous exhaustion, though details of his specific difficulties were sealed in military medical records that civilian police could not access. Several of his former parishioners from his previous assignment in Worcester had complained to church authorities about his excessive interest in young female parishioners, leading to his transfer to Boston in 1963. On the evening of October 15th, Father Torino claimed he had been in his rectory at St. Leonard's preparing Sunday sermon notes and could provide no witnesses to confirm his whereabouts between 7:00 p.m. and 9:00 p.m. When investigators examined his personal quarters, they discovered a collection of photographs featuring various nuns from different parishes, including 3 pictures of Sister Teresa taken during community events at St. Catherine's. Father Torino explained these photos as documentation of his pastoral work, but the images had been carefully mounted and preserved in a way that suggested personal rather than professional interest. Most damaging to Father Torino's credibility was the testimony of Sister Joan Murphy, who revealed that Teresa had confided concerns about the priest's behavior during their most recent interaction. According to Sister Joan, Teresa had mentioned that Father Torino had asked her to meet him privately in the convent's basement storage room to discuss spiritual matters that required absolute privacy. Teresa had declined this request, but Sister Joan's testimony suggested that Father Torino might have arranged such a meeting without Teresa's knowledge or consent. The investigation into Father Torino intensified when detectives discovered that he possessed a key to the convent's rear entrance, a privilege granted to him by Mother Superior Agnes to facilitate his weekly confession visits. This key would have allowed him to enter the building through the basement level without being observed by other sisters. However, the case against Father Torino collapsed when investigators learned that he had been observed by multiple witnesses at a church council meeting in downtown Boston from 7:30 p.m. until nearly 10:00 p.m. on October 15th, making it physically impossible for him to have committed the murder. Dr. Richard Castleton represented the investigation's third major suspect, though his connection to the case was more subtle and required extensive detective work to uncover. Castleton, a 51-year-old physician who maintained a private practice on Commercial Street, had been providing basic medical care to the nuns at St. Catherine's Convent for nearly 8 years. His involvement with the religious community began when Mother Superior Agnes approached him in 1957 seeking affordable health care for sisters who had no other access to medical treatment. Dr. Castleton's background appeared exemplary on the surface. A graduate of Harvard Medical School in 1939, he had served as a Navy medical officer during World War II before establishing his Boston practice in 1947. He was married to Eleanor Castleton, a prominent member of several charitable organizations, and they had raised 3 children who were attending prestigious East Coast universities. The family lived in a substantial home on Beacon Hill and were regular attendees at Trinity Church, where Dr. Castleton served on the board of trustees. However, Detective Morrison's investigation revealed troubling aspects of Dr. Castleton's character that he had successfully hidden from his respectable public facade. Several former patients had complained to the Massachusetts Board of Medical Examiners about inappropriate behavior during examinations, though none had filed formal charges. More concerning were financial records that suggested Dr. Castleton was struggling with significant gambling debts, having lost substantial amounts at horse racing tracks throughout New England. The connection between Dr. Castleton and Sister Teresa's murder emerged through financial documents that investigators discovered in the convent's files. Teresa had been working with Mother Superior Agnes to organize and catalogue decades of correspondence and financial records stored in the basement room where she was killed. Among these documents were receipts and letters, suggesting that Dr. Castleton had been systematically overcharging the convent for medical services, inflating bills, and charging for visits that had never occurred. Sister Margaret's hidden notes revealed that Teresa had approached her just 1 week before the murder, expressing concerns about financial discrepancies she had discovered while organizing the basement storage area. Teresa had apparently found evidence that Dr. Castleton had been embezzling money from the convent for years, using their trust and limited financial oversight to fund his gambling addiction. The manila envelope Teresa was carrying when she was murdered likely contained this evidence, which would explain why her killer had spent time searching through storage room documents after committing the murder. Dr. Castleton's alibi for October 15th was initially solid, as his appointment book showed patient visits scheduled until 8:00 p.m., followed by a medical society dinner at the Parker House Hotel. However, further investigation revealed that his final appointment had cancelled that afternoon, and several colleagues at the medical society dinner could not specifically remember seeing him until nearly 9:30 p.m. This timeline would have provided sufficient opportunity for him to travel to the convent, confront Teresa about her discoveries, and return to the hotel. The case against Dr. Castleton strengthened when investigators found muddy shoes in his office that matched soil samples from the alley behind St. Catherine's Convent. Additionally, a dark wool overcoat hanging in his office showed signs of recent repair to a torn area near the left sleeve, consistent with the fabric sample found at the crime scene. However, the investigation was abruptly terminated when Dr. Castleton's influential connections intervened, and pressure from city officials led Detective Morrison to focus his attention on other suspects. The trial proceedings stretched across several months, with jury selection beginning in early September. District Attorney Michael Patterson assembled a prosecution team that included veteran prosecutor Sarah Chen, who had handled complex cold cases for over 15 years. The courtroom in Suffolk County Superior Court became packed daily with observers, including many elderly residents who remembered the original investigation. "I never thought I'd live to see this day," said Margaret O'Sullivan, now 84, who had worked as a secretary at the convent in 1965. "Sister Catherine deserves justice, even if it's taken nearly 60 years. The prosecution's case relied heavily on the DNA evidence recovered from beneath Sister Catherine's fingernails. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, the forensic geneticist who had developed the genetic profile, testified for 3 days about the scientific methodology. "The sample contained epithelial cells consistent with defensive wounds," she explained to the jury. "The defendant's DNA was found with a probability of 1 in 4, 2 billion, that it belonged to someone else." Defense attorney Robert Clearwater attempted to challenge the chain of custody, arguing that evidence stored for nearly 6 decades could have been contaminated. However, Prosecutor Chen systematically presented documentation showing the evidence had been properly maintained in climate-controlled storage since 1967. The most compelling testimony came from retired Detective Frank Morrison, now 79, who had worked the original case as a young officer. Morrison took the stand with his original case files, preserved in his personal collection after his retirement. "Father Sullivan was always someone we looked at," Morrison testified. "But in 1965, we didn't have the tools we have today. DNA analysis was science fiction then." Morrison's testimony revealed that Sullivan had actually been questioned twice in the original investigation, but had provided what seemed like credible alibis. "He told us he was hearing confessions in the main chapel during the estimated time of death," Morrison recalled. 2 other nuns confirmed they had seen him there around 4 o'clock. The prosecution presented evidence that Sullivan had manipulated the alibi system. Mother Superior Agnes Whitfield, who had died in 1983, had left behind detailed records that prosecutors discovered in the convent archives. These records showed discrepancies in the confession schedule that Sullivan had claimed to be following. The defendant had actually requested a change to the confession schedule 3 days before Sister Catherine's death, Prosecutor Chen told the jury. He specifically asked to be moved to the isolated prayer room where the murder occurred. Dr. Patricia Reinhold, a forensic psychologist who had interviewed Sullivan extensively, provided disturbing insights into his psychological profile. "The defendant exhibits classic signs of narcissistic personality disorder with psychopathic traits," she testified. "He showed no genuine remorse during our sessions, only concern about how the charges would affect his reputation." Reinhold's analysis revealed that Sullivan had likely committed the murder during a psychotic break triggered by Sister Catherine's discovery of his inappropriate behavior with altar boys. Sister Catherine had scheduled a meeting with the bishop for the following Monday, Reinhold explained. She had documented evidence of the defendant's misconduct. He killed her to protect himself. The defense strategy focused on Sullivan's decades of community service and the lack of direct eyewitness testimony. Defense attorney Clearwater called character witnesses, including former parishioners and community leaders, who testified about Sullivan's positive contributions. Father Sullivan married my parents, baptized my children and buried my grandmother, testified Maria Santos, a longtime parishioner. This doesn't match the man we've known for 50 years. However, Prosecutor Chen's cross-examination revealed that many of these witnesses had never been alone with Sullivan, or in positions where they could observe potential misconduct. The most dramatic moment came when Sullivan himself took the stand. Against his attorney's advice, the 83-year-old defendant chose to testify. His appearance shocked many observers. The once imposing figure now appeared frail and confused. "I loved Sister Catherine like a daughter," Sullivan testified, his voice barely audible. "I could never hurt her or anyone else." However, under cross-examination by Prosecutor Chen, Sullivan's story began to unravel. When confronted with the DNA evidence, he claimed he couldn't remember the specific day clearly. "I might have found her body first," he suggested. "Maybe I tried to help her, and that's how my DNA got there." Prosecutor Chen methodically dismantled this explanation. "Mr. Sullivan, you testified earlier that you discovered Sister Catherine's body with Father McKenna around 5:30. Now you're saying you might have found her alone first." Sullivan became increasingly agitated, eventually shouting at Chen, "You don't understand what it was like then, the pressure, the expectations." This outburst, captured by courtroom cameras, became a pivotal moment for the prosecution. The trial's most emotional testimony came from Sister Catherine's surviving family members. Her nephew, James Murphy, now 68, had become the family's primary advocate for justice. "My aunt dedicated her life to helping others," Murphy testified through tears. "She taught disadvantaged children, cared for the sick, and tried to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Her reward was to die alone, terrified, at the hands of someone she trusted." Murphy's sister, Patricia, described how the unsolved murder had haunted their family for decades. "Every Christmas, every birthday, every family gathering, there was an empty chair and unanswered questions," she said. The prosecution also presented evidence of Sullivan's suspicious behavior in the years following the murder. Retired FBI profiler David Kessler testified about patterns of predatory behavior. The defendant used his position of authority to access vulnerable individuals, Kessler explained. The murder of Sister Catherine represents an escalation when his secret was threatened. Kessler's analysis included interviews with former altar boys and students who had reported inappropriate contact with Sullivan over the years. "There's a clear pattern of manipulation and abuse of power spanning 5 decades, Kessler concluded. Defense attorney Clearwater's closing argument emphasized the circumstantial nature of the evidence and Sullivan's advanced age. "My client is an 83-year-old man being condemned for a crime allegedly committed when he was a young priest under enormous pressure," Clearwater argued. "The DNA evidence, while compelling, doesn't tell us when or how it was deposited. There are innocent explanations that reasonable doubt demands you consider." Clearwater portrayed Sullivan as a scapegoat for the Catholic Church's broader scandals, arguing that prosecutors were seeking to solve a cold case at any cost. Prosecutor Chen's closing argument lasted nearly 4 hours and left many jurors visibly moved. Sister Catherine Margaret O'Brien fought for her life on March 15, 1965, Chen told the jury. She scratched her attacker, unknowingly preserving the evidence that would eventually bring him to justice. That evidence points to one person, the defendant, who betrayed the sacred trust placed in him. Chen systematically reviewed the evidence, from the DNA match to Sullivan's manipulated alibi to his pattern of predatory behavior. "Justice delayed is not justice denied," she concluded. "Sister Catherine has waited 58 years. Don't make her wait any longer." The jury deliberated for 3 days before reaching their verdict. On November 18, 2023, at 2:47 p.m., They found Daniel Patrick Sullivan guilty of first-degree murder. The courtroom erupted in emotion as the verdict was read. James Murphy collapsed in tears, supported by his sister Patricia. Several elderly nuns who had known Sister Catherine crossed themselves and whispered prayers. Sullivan showed no visible reaction, staring straight ahead as his attorney placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Judge Rebecca Martinez sentenced Sullivan to life in prison without the possibility of parole, despite his advanced age. "Mr. Sullivan, you have been convicted of the brutal murder of a woman who devoted her life to service and compassion," Judge Martinez stated. "Your actions not only took Sister Catherine's life, but caused decades of pain for her family and community. While the court recognizes your age and infirmity, the heinous nature of this crime demands the maximum penalty." Sullivan was immediately taken into custody and transported to MCI Cedar Junction, where he would spend his remaining years. The conviction brought mixed emotions to those who had followed the case for decades. Detective Morrison, who had worked the original investigation, attended the sentencing. "I always knew we'd missed something back then," he said afterward. "I'm grateful that science finally gave Sister Catherine the justice she deserved, even though it took nearly 60 years. The Boston Archdiocese released a statement acknowledging the conviction while expressing regret for the pain caused to victims and families. "We are committed to ensuring such tragedies never happen again through improved oversight and transparency," the statement read. Sister Catherine's legacy extends far beyond her tragic death. The Catherine O'Brien Foundation, established by her family in 1995, has provided scholarships to disadvantaged students and support for victims of clerical abuse. The foundation has awarded over 200 scholarships and helped establish support groups in 12 states. "Aunt Catherine always believed education was the key to breaking cycles of poverty and abuse," James Murphy explained. "This foundation continues her work and ensures her death wasn't meaningless." The case has become a landmark in both cold case investigations and discussions about institutional abuse. The DNA evidence techniques developed for this case have been applied to over 150 similar cold cases nationwide, resulting in 43 convictions. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell's methodology for analyzing degraded DNA samples has become standard practice in forensic laboratories across the country. The O'Brien case proved that no crime is too old if proper evidence preservation and advanced science come together, Hartwell noted. The investigation also prompted changes in how religious institutions handle abuse allegations. Massachusetts passed the Sister Catherine Act in 2024, requiring mandatory reporting of suspected abuse within religious organizations and establishing independent oversight boards. Similar legislation has been introduced in 8 other states. Sister Catherine's courage in documenting abuse and planning to report it ultimately led to protections for countless others, said victim advocate Sarah Mitchell. The Boston Convent, where Sister Catherine died, has been transformed into a community center, serving underprivileged families. The prayer room where she was murdered now houses a memorial garden with a bronze plaque reading, "Sister Catherine Margaret O'Brien, 1923–1965. She gave her life protecting the innocent." The garden features white roses, Sister Catherine's favorite flowers, and provides a peaceful space for reflection and remembrance. The case has also influenced training for law enforcement officers handling cold cases. The Boston Police Department now requires specialized training in evidence preservation and victim advocacy for all detectives assigned to cold case units. Detective Maria Santos, who leads the current cold case team, credits the O'Brien investigation with transforming their approach. "We learned that families never stop grieving, communities never stop seeking answers, and justice delayed doesn't mean justice denied," Santos explained. For the O'Brien family, Sullivan's conviction brought closure to a pain that had defined their lives for nearly 6 decades. Patricia Murphy, now 75, described the verdict as bittersweet. "We're grateful for justice, but it can't bring back the years of wondering, the sleepless nights, the questions that haunted our family," she said. "I just hope other families facing similar situations never give up hope. Sister Catherine never gave up fighting for what was right, even when it cost her everything." The story of Sister Catherine Margaret O'Brien serves as a powerful reminder that truth and justice, while sometimes delayed, can ultimately prevail. Her courage in confronting abuse and corruption within her own religious community cost her life, but eventually led to protections for countless others. The advanced forensic techniques that solved her case continue to bring closure to families across the nation, while the institutional reforms sparked by her case help prevent similar tragedies. As Sullivan serves his life sentence at age 83, the community that once revered him continues to grapple with the reality of his crimes. His conviction represents not just justice for Sister Catherine, but acknowledgement of the many victims whose voices were silenced by institutional power and secrecy. The case stands as testament to the importance of believing victims, preserving evidence, and never abandoning the pursuit of truth no matter how many years may pass. Today, visitors to the Memorial Garden can find peace in the space where Sister Catherine spent her final moments. The white roses bloom each spring, a symbol of renewal and hope that even in darkness, truth will eventually come to light. Her story reminds us that some fights are worth dying for, and some truths are worth waiting decades to uncover.